Hey, this is Labor Day, and instead of doing the reading on Saturday, it was Silenar's anniversary that day. So we actually I didn't get a chance to do any recording of the reading that I'm doing with Dr. Reverend Wurmbrand in his book, The Answer to the Atheist Handbook. So the Atheistic Handbook, just to remind you guys, was a book issued in 1961 by Moscow's Academy of Science. And as Dr. Reverend Rumbrand was arrested and imprisoned for quite a few years under the hand of a socialist regime in Moscow that used this handbook as kind of their guiding light. He wrote this book that we're reading, kind of as a rebuttal to the Atheistic Handbook. So, so he was really familiar with Marxist ideas and socialistic ideas and things of that nature. And I know when I went to college, it was super funny because college usually talks about socialism and Marxism in sometimes a romanticized way. And anyway, and sometimes there's not too much critical thinking against it as well. But I always recommend too the atheist Christopher Hitchens. If you've ever seen him debate before he passed away, he was quite the debater. But you could always read his brother Peter Hitchens' book. I think it's called The Rage Against God. And he talks a lot about what was going on in the Soviet Union too, with Marxism and communism, socialism, kind of these ideas that were I don't know if you call them experimented by those in Russia, but you can definitely see how things worked out and how it changed Peter Hitchens' life as well. So anyway, Reverend Rumbrand writes this book in an apologetic style. So he's already spoken of, let me kind of give you what he's talked about. He talked about what the Atheistic Handbook was, the reasonableness of atheism, and then he talks the reasonableness of atheism, and then he talks about the wrong perspective of the Atheist Handbook. Next one was who are our opponents? Question. The next one, the difficulty of being an atheist, and then the definition of religion, the origin of religion, the origin of Christianity, Roman authors about Christianity, and now we are on the witness of the Gospels. And that's where we're at. That the Gospels were not written in the first century is an axiom for the Atheist Handbook. They were supposedly written by late clever forgers. I always remember growing up and hearing that too. That's how, because I was not raised in the church, as most of you know. But, yeah, so most of us always think like, oh, the gospel accounts were written much later and they were written to, for money or things of that nature. We say a lot of interesting things. It says the Gospel of John was allegedly written only at the end of the 2nd century. But Ignatius quoted from it, although he was martyred before the year 116. So we got a problem, right? Justin the philosopher quoted it. He died around 140. Even Losey, the French critic of the Bible, admits that this gospel was already received in Rome by the year 130. A simple analysis of the contents of the Gospels show that they could be no late forgeries. In asserting this, my opponents put themselves in opposition even to Engels, who ridicules the idea that Christianity is the work of deceivers. C. F. Engels, Bruno Bayer, The Ancient Christianity. It looks like Bauer, actually, B-A-U-E-R. Bruno Bauer, B-A-U-E-R. At the end of the 2nd century, when the Gospels were allegedly invited, the names of the apostles were highly respected in Christian circles. Why then should a forger who wished his writing to be accredited as God-inspired tell the churches that Jesus called Peter Satan and also rebuked the other apostles? Such words would never have appeared in the Gospel if they had not really been said. The The apostles were highly esteemed in the church. Uh, Deprecatory words about them would not have been invented by Christians. At the end of the 2nd century, Christ was worshipped as God in the whole church. Every forger foolish enough to attribute to him a narrow friendship with women or a weakness that made him cry on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" would never have had this book accepted as a holy book. The same applies to the description of Jesus' fear and anxiety in Gethsemane. Such incidents made the name of the Savior open to attack. Celsus, in a book dated AD 170, mocks Jesus because his anguish on the cross, reminding us that his disciples endured suffering in brave silence. He must have known the facts about Jesus from the Gospels. The evangelists did not write them down to accomplish their own self-serving purposes, but simply because they had witnessed them, and they did not care if the sighs and tears, suffering and pain would degrade Jesus in the opinion of many. Such accounts are the proof of a genuineness and clearly age of the Gospels, and an early age of the Gospels. Late forgeries would have been full of adulation for Jesus. They would not tell us that he was considered by some of his contemporaries, by his own people, as the devil. Mark chapter 3:21. The Gospels and the epistles retain some Aramaic words. Aramaic was the language spoken by the Jews in Palestine. If the Gospels were written at the end of the 2nd century in the Greek-speaking world, why would the forgers have retained the Aramaic utterances? They made sense only in the first decades of the Christian history, when the majority of Christians were Jews. The Gospel contained big debates between Jesus and his adversaries about the right manner of keeping the Sabbath and about the value of Jewish ceremonies. For Jewish readers of the 1st century, these were important. Gentile Christians of the 2nd century would not have understood or been concerned with what the discussions were about. A forger would have had to explain the meaning of phylacteries, a tithe, a Jewish ablutions, who the Pharisees and Sadducees were, etc. But the authors of the Gospels take this knowledge for granted because they wrote very early and recorded the episodes of the life of Jesus exactly as they happened. Nowhere in the New Testament do we find the slightest trace of a church in a village. Christianity must have been primarily an urban phenomenon. Why then should foreigners have put in the mouth of Jesus continual allusions to country life, to birds, and to flowers, and to farming? We have known in this century masters in forgery. They painted the nimbus of a deity around a man whom they themselves afterward denounced as a criminal. Forgers must be clever men. If the gospel writers had been forgers, they would not have made such terrible mistakes, nor would they have succeeded in having their books accepted as sacred scriptures. There's a new book that's come out, and it's called like Too Good to Be True. And I'm pretty sure that's a book that kind of goes in this kind of argument, this kind of way of arguing, is that if the Gospels were forgeries, then why do they have these mistakes, quote, in them? Anyway. A detail of the Gospel narrative which proves its historical accuracy as well as its old age is found in John 19:34. We are told that when one of the soldiers pierced the side of our crucified Lord with a spear, immediately blood and water came out. The reason is not given, but the evangelist John had been an eyewitness, and he wrote what he had seen. Neither he nor anyone else at the time could explain what happened. Only after 18 centuries did a Dr. Simpson discover a chloroform show that Jesus Christ died from what is called in scientific language extravasation of blood, or in modern language, a broken heart. When one dies in this way, the arms are thrown out. Of course, Jesus' arms were already stretched out on the cross. There is a loud cry, such as Jesus uttered, and the blood escapes into the pericardium and prevents the heart from beating. There the blood stands for a short time. It separates into serum, the water, and clots, the red corpuscle, something in the blood. I wish I could read words better. But when the soldier pierced the back pericardium, the blood and water flowed out. It is conceivable that a writer would have made up such an account of facts which never occurred, but for which a strictly scientific explanation fitting precisely the facts could be given only after nearly 2,000 years. The story about the gospel being a late forgery is in itself a late forgery. It is conceivable that a non-existent mythological personality was the creator of the whole Christian civilization, the citizens of which outnumber those of an earthly empire. No empire has existed for 2,000 years as has the Christian Empire, which has survived the persecution, hate, and privation of 20 centuries. Christianity is the greatest fact in the world, and this greatest fact was produced by a non-existent personality? Sheer nonsense. Who can believe such a thing? John Stuart Mill wrote, quote, "It is no use to say that Christ, as exhibited in the Gospels, is not historical. Who among his disciples or among the proselytes was capable of inventing the saying ascribed to Jesus or imagining the life and character revealed in the Gospels? Certainly not the fishermen of Galilee, and certainly not St. Paul." Unquote. Who could have invented the personality of Jesus? Not only his goodness and meekness, but his genius in dealing with people and problems, his insight and ability as an evangelist. And then who would be the inventors of Jesus? Jews could not have invented him, because in the first century their monotheism was so stubbornly maintained that they would never have invented a man as representing the incarnation of their unseen God. Jews despised other nations. They would not drink a cup of water from the hands of a Samaritan, so they certainly could not have invented Jesus, who made friends with foreigners. They believed in themselves as the chosen race. Why should they have invented someone who obliterated all race distinctions and embraced all people? Nor could the first Christians have invented him. We see from the beginning that far from being able to invent a Jesus, they could only spoil his beautiful name. Paul already writes that in his time, the majority of those who preached did so out of greed, covetousness, a desire for fame, and selfish motives, and had distorted the word of God. Greedy and selfish preachers cannot invent a Jesus. And even if men had succeeded in inventing an incarnate God, they would never have invented him as a Jew, a man belonging to a despised race, and as a carpenter, as that, a man without learning, who was born in a manger and died on a cross, and who has not left one written sentence behind him. Such things cannot be invented. 3 questions are spoken by the devil when he tempted Jesus in the wilderness. Quote, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." Unquote. Quote again, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from the pinnacle of the temple. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Unquote. "And all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me." Referring to these 3 questions, Dostoevsky writes in The Brothers Karamazov, "If there has ever been on earth a real stupendous miracle, it took place on the day of the 3 temptations. The statement of these 3 questions has itself the miracle. If it were possible to imagine simply for the sake of argument that those three questions of the dread spirit had perished utterly from the books, and that we had to restore them and to invent them anew, to do so had gathered together all the wise men of the earth, rulers, chief priests, learned men, philosophers, poets, and had set them the task to invent three questions, such as would not only fit the occasion, but express in three words, three human phrases, the whole future of history of the world and of humanity. Dost thou believe that all the wisdom of the earth united could have invented anything in depth and force equal to the three questions which are actually put to thee thence by the wise and mighty Spirit in the wilderness? From those questions alone, from the miracle of their testament, we can see that we have here to do not with fleeting human intelligence, but with the absolute and eternal. Ingersoll, a well-known atheistic writer, said about Jesus, "With Renan, I believe Christ was the one perfect man. Do unto others as you would have as that they should do unto you, is the perfection of religion and morality. It is the summum bonum. It was loftier than the teachings of Socrates, Plato, Muhammad, Moses, Confucius. It supersedes the commandments that Moses claimed to have gotten from God. For with Christ, do unto others, there could be no murder, lying, covetousness, or war. The perfect man cannot be invented by very imperfect apostles." Cool. So that's his argument against the atheistic handbook, and he titled that one "The Witness of the Gospels." So some people argue that the Gospels were just written by forgers, and so Reverend Wurmbrand writes that chapter to say, well, if it was, then they made a ton of errors, and how could imperfect people write such beauty and perfection in other areas? So he made some good claims too. So anyway, that was a good little chapter. I'm glad we got that in. So you guys have a great Labor Day, and hopefully next week we'll continue our reading. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.